So hi again, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us again. Today we're going to talk about how we may be able to control aspects of our autonomic nervous system and the blood vessels, either consciously or unconsciously. So Boone, tell us, is there anything we can do to improve the control over our blood vessels and our autonomic nervous system?
So a very, very wide question, and a question which the answer might take an hour. But let me focus on a few topics. The overarching principle here is that the autonomic nervous system, which is that deep-centered, primitive brain of ours, which controls all the things we don't need to think about, such as heart rate, temperature regulation, vasoconstriction, which is contraction of the blood vessels, heart rate, sweating, pupillary dilatation. These kind of things that are not thought about in our day-to-day conscious activities are the things fundamentally that keep us alive and ticking along. So when you talk about controlling your autonomic nervous system, which is also known as the subconscious nervous system, uh, I think about it as a two-way approach. The first way is a bottom-up approach, and the second way is a top-down approach. And I think because the topic is so wide, let me focus on one of the ways from a bottom-up approach that I feel may be relevant. And that could be to do with vascular training. Now, vascular training relates to the concept that you need to train your vessels to be able to constrict very tightly at times of stress, and equally be able to be reactive and relax when needed. This is the fundamental principle of blood pressure control. And actually, the vasoconstriction that occurs, the constriction of the blood vessel, tends to occur in response to a subconscious release of adrenaline or noradrenaline. These are two hormones that really have a strong impact on the vascular system. So it contracts and relaxes in response to acute adrenaline release. Now, one of the things that people with syncope will say to me and say to all of us really is that they don't like being in warm weather. So summertime is particularly bad. Summertime on a hot underground carriage is even worse. A warm hot bath or an experience in a sauna can often trigger dizziness and fainting. And so the impact of heat can lead to vasodilatation, where the vessels dilate, probably in the largest organ of the body, which is the skin, which can really take away many hundreds of mils of blood into the skin. For example, imagine yourself having a flushed face. So what is the opposite of a flush hot environment, a hot environment that makes you flushed? The opposite of that is cold, right? And so one interesting concept that I've been also practicing myself is vascular training from being in the cold. So every so often, for example, for me, once a day at least, when I take a shower, at the end of the shower, I'm turning down the heat so that I have an ice cold, invigorating blast of cold water at the end. And I think this, if you have vasovagal syncope, you will probably find this initially, as all of us do, a shocking experience when you potentially even have the gasp reflex when confronted with ice cold water. But after a while, you get used to it. And I've noticed a feeling change in myself because initially the cold water gives you this shocking sensation. And you could argue that is an initial fight or flight response. How is that helpful? That must be stressful. Well, stress, I think, comes in different forms. It has the acute form, which is extremely helpful. So it is in our nature to be stressed out. For example, when we are needing to run away from that saber-toothed cat. So the ancient advantage that we have been gifted to run when we need to run, or to react when we need to react very quickly to a threat or an interview or an anxiety or anger burst or a fight, is very helpful when done very acutely. So if the stress lasts for example, 5 or 10 minutes, and you can completely de-stress afterwards, it's very helpful because you are vascular training. And then coming out of this cold shower where you no longer have the adrenaline and you warm up, the vessels relax. And in doing that and creating that tension where the muscles can relax and contract several times a day, potentially. So the other trick is when you wash your hands, wash it with cold water. And this vascular training will eventually help you respond more meaningfully to changes in uh, the situations around you so that you are very reactive and responsive. And I think this is one untapped way, which I consider a bottom-up approach, because you're forcing a change in the autonomic nervous system by creating something which is cold or a cold shock or cold immersion. Now, how do you do it practically? You take your normal warm shower, and at the end, you start with 15 seconds of the cold blast. If at the end of that you feel completely cold and shivering, then go back to warm and warm yourself up before you dry down. But if not, then end your shower with the cold and extend the time to 20 seconds the next day, 25 seconds, 30 seconds. And if you can do 2 minutes at the end, what you might find, or what I've found, is that the water that is feeling very jarring and cold starts to warm up. And you know your vascular tone is started to train when you can tolerate that same temperature of water that you used not to tolerate a week ago. And this is your own validation of the technique. And it's very unlikely then you will faint after a shower, because the vasoconstriction that occurs will boost your blood pressure acutely. So it's another top tip. If you come out of bath and when you finish the bath, you finish it with a shower, try and make that shower cool, because it's very likely to make you feel a lot better if you are a fainter. So that's my
That's
top tip for today.
that's great. And Boone, tell us, how long can you now tolerate in an ice cold shower?
My longest is probably 3 minutes,
Very
but
impressive.
it so I cheat because I start with lukewarm, and then only at the end do I go ice cold. And on days like this, I mean, it's now 0 degrees outside, there's ice all over. Sometimes I don't feel so brave. But I really think in the summertime or in spring, when it starts to warm up, I'll be starting at lukewarm and then ending the shower for, let's say, 3 minutes in ice cold without any heating. And I must say, it's very invigorating. And I've seen on my own heart rate tracker that the heart rate has dropped by about 3 to 5 points after starting this process for the last 5 months. So I'm a convert. I enjoy cold showers, and it's something that I will continue to do.
And it's the same principle as cold water swimming, which we know is often used as a therapy for depression. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Boone.
I just want to share one more thing. I grew up in Kuala Lumpur, which is a very hot tropical city, and I never had the benefit of central heating. And so I remember waking up at 6 in the morning and having a cold shower every morning, because there's no way to not have a cold shower. And even in Kuala Lumpur, in a tropical city, the water can be very icy. And to this day, my father, who is more than 70 years old, and my mother, they have cold showers every day, and they are relatively mobile. And actually, a cold shower does not harm, in my opinion. The luxury of warmth is, or the fasting from a luxury of warmth is something that we could learn to do more. And it brings me back to my childhood.
Lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Boone.
Take care.